Corid is the only over-the-counter drug you can buy to treat coccidia if your goats wind up with coccidiosis. He was asking about using Corid for preventing coccidia, which I have never been a fan of because Corid is a coccidiacide, meaning that it kills coccidia. And the way that it does that, the mode of action is that it depletes the thiamine in the coccidia. This is where a lot of people get very nervous about Corid and talk about goats becoming thiamine deficient from Corid. And this is also where some people freak out and say, well, if you give your goat Corid, you need to give them thiamine at the same time. Okay, if you do that, you're counteracting the Corid. The Corid will not work. If you are really, really worried about that, you could give them thiamine after you treat with Corid. But if you do it while you're treating it, it's like you're just doing these two things that are fighting against each other. And so you're not going to kill any coccidia. I have never known anybody who actually had a goat get sick and wind up thiamine deficient or with goat polio or anything like that if they used Corid according to the instructions for treatment. And that is for 5 days. The prevention is for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, and it's at a lower dosage, which to me seems insane. Like nobody would say you should take a low dosage of penicillin for 2 or 3 weeks so that you don't get sick. So I don't understand why anybody thinks it's a good idea to do this, because now Corid is the only over-the-counter drug you can buy to treat coccidia if your goats wind up with coccidiosis. So I don't want to use the only drug I can use if a goat gets sick. If you use it as a preventative and the goats get coccidia anyway, or coccidiosis anyway, then it's going to be pointless to use it to try and treat it. So if you really, really, truly need a coccidiosis prevention, it's better to get the medicated feed, because that is a coccidiostat. And instead of killing the coccidia, it inhibits their reproduction. And what happens is when kids get stressed, so when they get weaned or go to a new home or both, they get stressed. And if they don't have a really strong immune system, then the coccidia can reproduce wildly and they wind up with coccidiosis. That is when the medicated feed should be fed. The medicated feed only has a coccidiostat in it. There's not a dewormer in it. It doesn't specifically prevent urinary calculi. Medicated feed means it has a coccidiostat in it to prevent coccidiosis. Usually, if you are feeding that to kids, they don't get coccidiosis. However, I have known people who thought that's all they needed to do, and their kids wound up with coccidiosis anyway. Preventing coccidiosis is really about management. And this is the big thing. If you are dealing with coccidiosis right now, I would be curious like how old your kids are and how much they weigh. Because once we started tracking our kids' weight gain and making sure that everybody gained at least 4 ounces a day and that they hit that 20-pound mark by 8 to 10 weeks, our coccidiosis problems basically went away. We used to be one of those places where we thought like, oh yeah, we got to feed the kids the medicated feed every spring so that we don't have a bunch of poopy butts out there. And then once we started tracking the weight gain, we discovered that the ones that were getting coccidiosis were the ones that were underweight. Milk has a lot of antibodies in it, and adults are immune to coccidia. So it's like you're giving your kids a vaccine for coccidiosis when they're nursing from mom and getting her milk, because it's got the antibodies in it for that. So that's why I track the weight gain. And so since we've started doing that, we have had 2 kids that have had coccidiosis in 8-9 years. The other part of that picture is keeping control of poop. So I would always say to interns, if you're not willing to sit in the stall and play with the baby goats because there's poop in there, then it's not clean enough for the baby goats either. Because baby goats, just like human babies, they explore the world with their mouth. They're putting everything in their mouth. And so they may pick up poop pellets or pick up straw or other bedding or hay that has been pooped on and has coccidia oocysts in it. And that's how they get infected. And a little bit of an infection is fine, especially if they're nursing from mom and getting plenty of milk, because her body is helping them fight that, keep them from getting sick. But there's too much poop in there and they're consuming too many oocysts, then they can still wind up with coccidiosis. And that's the same thing, that if you are feeding a medicated feed, but your kids are underweight or there's a lot of poop in your barn, then they can still wind up with coccidiosis.